everyone. Welcome back to the Going Scared podcast. This is your host, Jessica Honecker, founder of the social impact fashion brand Noonday Collection. Join me here every week for conversations on living lives of purpose by leaving comfort and going scared. Well, today marks the final day in our series around difficult dialogue. And I gotta say, I have loved this podcast series, and it's been really challenging for me, holding tensions, talking so much about how we can agree to disagree. Obviously, behind the scenes, I'm having a lot of these conversations in real life, and then bringing them to you was a whole nother level of challenge. And that's kind of why I wanted to wrap up the season with the champion of good news, because you know what? I think we could all use a little bit of good news. So that's why I asked Branden Harvey of Good Co. to come and share the audio stage with me as the final guest on our Difficult Dialogue series. Branden is a storyteller focused on the good in the world, and as the founder of Good, he leads an uprising of hopefuls marching against hate, fear, and injustice in the world by celebrating and becoming accomplices in good work. Already, since subscribing to his newsletter, I exhale. Every time I get it, because my normal news that I scroll is so negative. I mean, it really is. Now, what Branden's going to share on this episode is that actually you do read good news. It's just the negative tends to stick to us. So he is on a fight to get the good to stick to us. And, you know, after all of these conversations, touching on heavy topics, interviewing an African-American police officer, talking about immigration, disability, how to have difficult dialogue with different people that differ from you politically, I think this is what we need. This is what we need to close the series. So I'm going to take a little break from the show for the next few weeks, and I need a personal exhale myself, realizing that this fall is when I ran out of steam a little bit. It kind of has done a number on me. So I am doing some things behind the scenes to refill and recharge, including subscribing to the Good Co. newsletter. And we're coming back at ya, y'all, and I am pretty excited about our next mini-series because it is with one of my dear friends and someone who has really transformed my life, Dr. Kurt Thompson, he's a psychiatrist. He's written a couple of books that I'm actually rereading right now, and we are going to be diving into mental health. We're going to be talking about ambiguous loss, isolation, connection, neurobiology of the brain, post-traumatic growth disorder. We are going to cover it all, and it's going to come in a really nice season. So I'm going to miss you. During the break, I'd love for you to go and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I would deeply appreciate that. And specifically, if you want to leave a review about this series, what'd you learn? What are maybe some more conversations that you'd want to have? All right, here is my conversation with Branden. Branden, when I saw on my calendar today that I was getting to interview you, I immediately got a huge smile on my face. And just now when I heard your voice, I smiled from ear to ear, like big, gigantic smile. And that is just how you show up. And I've only talked to you one other time when you had me on your podcast. I don't think I've ever met you in person, but is this how people experience you? I experience you as someone who makes others smile.
Well, I am incredibly honored by that, and I feel the exact same way about you and your voice. And I remember coming away from our call that we had on my show and just being like, "Did we just become best friends?" And so it just feels good to be reunited, and so the feeling is absolutely mutual.
Okay, have you seen Social Dilemma yet?
I watched it, like 2 nights ago.
Okay, I watched it last night. Mind is being blown today. Like, mind is just, I need to watch it again and again. But one of the parts that stood out to me was really interesting. It was the very end, and it was the guy with the dreads that founded virtual reality.
Yep.
That guy, when you saw him at first, and you're like, huh, And then you see that he was the father of virtual reality, and you're like, oh, okay. He said at the end, which for you guys that are listening, The Social Dilemma, you have to go see it. It is really about how we can approach technology from a more humane perspective. And I believe, and I don't know if this was your main takeaway, it was really calling on policy and regulation in this field. But okay, so this guy says, and I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. He says it's the critics that drive improvement. The critics are the true optimists. And that just flipped that word critical on its head for me, because I actually can be a bit critical, and I've gotten 360 feedback from my team. But I just thought, you know what? I think sometimes optimists, it is because you have come at something from a critical angle. Would you say that is your experience when you founded Good, Good, Good?
Yeah. Well, that immediately brings to mind two things for me. One, with Good, 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 we have always held to this ideal that we want to focus on real good news, not feel good news. So there's a lot of things out there in the world that are just like positivity or like cute puppy videos. Like I love cute puppy videos. Like I'm on puppy TikTok. It's delightful. But like, that's not what we see as good news. That's just the absence of bad news. And what we see as good news is people who see a problem and they are choosing to look right at it and either support people who are on the front lines doing good, or they decide to join the front lines and do good. And it reminds me of this quote from Bernice King, who I admire. She's the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. And she says, being truthful about the state of our nation and world does not equal losing hope. Hope sees truth and still believes better. That which dismisses or does not seek truth, but grins saying, it will be okay, is naivety, not hope. And so that's really what it is. It's not just like, oh, I'm wishing for the best. It's saying, I care enough about this thing that I'm going to criticize it. And I'm not just going to criticize it from the sidelines. I'm going to do this in a way that can affect change, can actually create the solution, create the future that I want to see in the world.
Maybe it struck me because, as you say, the critic on the sidelines, I mean, that reminds me of course, Brene Brown has adopted, might as well have said it herself at this point, the Theodore Roosevelt quote about you could probably say it.
It's not the critic who counts.
Yes, it's not the critic who counts. The person in the arena. And I think that's why it was a little bit disruptive for me to hear someone who is a problem solver and deeply cares about more humane technology actually describe being a critic as an optimist.
Yeah.
So how would you, I think you kind of did. How would you describe optimism is what I was going to say. And then what is optimistic news?
Yes. Such a good question. And I almost want to just bring in another quote, which is like another one of my favorite quotes.
Let's just quote.
You're just like setting me up to talk about my favorite things. So there's this guy named Eric Liu, and he cares deeply about people being involved in civic engagement. And he has this quote that we printed in one of the centerfold posters of our Good newspaper. Actually, that Bernice King quote was as well. And he said, to be optimistic is to assume that things will work out. But to be hopeful is to realize that things can work out if you work at them. Mm-hmm. Hope requires responsibility and agency, and optimism relieves us of both. In rooting for your favorite sports team, choose optimism. In rooting for democracy, choose hope. And so like there's that nuanced difference again between what is optimism and what is hopefulness. And so we would describe what like the good news that we like to highlight as real messy hope. You know, we want to get our hands dirty and it's we don't want to, we never want to pretend that the world is okay. Look around, the world is not okay. There's literally like my world, when I look out my window, is on fire. Like there's literally smoke outside my windows in Oregon. We've got all of our crevices in our house covered with either plastic or wet towels because there's a problem. And if we just pretend that isn't like that everything's fine, then that fire is going to come burn down my house. It's going to come burn down my neighbors' houses. But when we look right at it, we go, this is a problem that's affecting people, not yet really me, but it could affect me. Then we have the opportunity to get involved and to say, how do I create a solution for others? Because I have the privilege of just seeing the smoke. If the flames are coming at my house, I've got to think about running. But if I'm just seeing the smoke, if I'm just seeing the news, if I'm just tuning into bad news, then I really ultimately have a privilege, and that privilege needs to be used to get involved and make a difference. And so what we want to do with Good, Good, Good is just celebrate the people who are using their privilege, whatever that privilege is, whether it's, your
Right.
financial resources, your knowledge, your relationships, your ability to communicate, using those things for good to make a difference, to move the needle. And then also just kind of like the beautiful thing is getting to imagine what a better world looks like because of that. You think about bigger issues like systemic racism or climate change. There's actually just this beautiful hopefulness in imagining what a better world looks like where we've solved those problems. And then, getting to work and taking the small steps towards, actually solving portions of those things in our lifetimes.
Now that I've been so regularly on the news, I have noticed its bias towards negativity. I mean, every single thing that I click on, it's always, I'm going to say it, it's negative. It's that clickbaity, and I'm talking from the New York Times to, I'll scroll Fox sometimes. I've got NPR, which, gives all news from all over, Medium. It seems to be this, and I'm very aware of it because I'm like, I'm about to click on this. What got my attention here? And I also know that psychology tells us that negative things stick to us like Velcro. Positive things tend to slide off like Teflon. And one psychological study even said that it takes one positive affirmation to stick to us and get rid of like the 5 negative things that have stuck out to us. We can be on social media and have some positive comment, but you get one negative comment and that's what you walk away with. So we have this unfortunate confirmation bias to confirm the negative. And I am struck by Good, 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 and how you want to click on it. You want to read the newsletter. You want to receive the newspaper because you want to click on the good. How come we're not seeing that more out in the mainstream media?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things there. You talked about this study that we reference all the time, this idea that we all have an internal negativity bias. Bad news, sticks to our brains like Velcro. Good news slides right off our brains like Teflon. And it makes sense that if you want to run a profitable news company, which, every other news company is more profitable than Good, Good, Good. It's not like we're raking in the money. You would lean into that psychology, which is, manipulative and unfortunate, but also, of course, understandable that news companies would do this. But the other thing is, there's a lot of times, like with our good newsletter, we often are sharing links out to other news sources, and we're linking to New York Times or Fox or NPR. It's not that like these good news stories are going unreported. It's just that they're going undernoticed. The reality is you've probably read a lot of good news stories, not from us, but your brain didn't slow down enough to appreciate it because the next news story that you read right after that was so bad that your brain basically buried it. And so that's one of the tricky things that we kind of have to overcome. And then the last thing is good things happening is unremarkable. Like it's actually really boring because the truth is every day, 1 billion good things happen and 5 bad things happen. Obviously an oversimplification, but it's important for us to know those bad things because the good things happen every day. 1,000 planes take off every day, or maybe before COVID that was happening, and they land safely as well. But of course, we just know about the 737 Maxes that didn't land correctly because that's news. That's interesting. We talk about pandemics and the fact that we've got COVID that's affecting millions and millions of people around the world. And of course, it's so important that we're paying attention to that. But like the thing that's not in the news every day is the fact that HIV and AIDS, another pandemic just 30 years ago, is at its lowest rates, since the height of, it's at their lowest rates ever.
Mm-hmm.
And just year after year, people who have the virus live full and healthy lives. And the number of people who are getting HIV and AIDS through childbirth, continues to decrease. Like there's all that good news, but because it happens every year, every day, it's just kind of boring. And so what we do at Good is we try to make that boring stuff actually really interesting, because it's incredible. It's remarkable if you think about it, because that, like the fact that HIV and AIDS, which was an absolute heartbreaking thing, that like the fact that we have somehow gotten to a point where it's actually totally manageable. We don't have a cure, but we have an ability to basically prolong people's lives to live full, healthy lives. Like that was all created by a series of decisions, policy choices, nonprofits, individual action that saved millions and millions of lives and improved the lives of millions more. And like, that's a good news story. And so, what can we do to make that fun and interesting? Whether it's, printing it in a beautiful print newspaper that, it's funny because it's in a newspaper and it like grabs your attention more. Or maybe it's, we're putting it front and center in an email to our audience, or we're making it a beautiful Instagram post that you kind of want to share just because it's beautiful. We're almost trying to just like help trick everybody's brains into paying attention to these things that we at our core want to be able to celebrate. We want to be reminded that there's good in the world, but our brains do not often remember that that's a priority for us.
Side note, you guys reposted something that one of our Noonday designers did on Instagram, and I tell you, my team was so excited. They just thought it was the coolest thing, and it was this beautiful image, and it was super positive. But I mean, they were like, "Jessica, did you see this today?" So thank you for that. But you bring up a good point on HIV AIDS, and listen to this disservice that we do, because we you equate HIV AIDS with Magic Johnson, with the fear around, can I sit on a toilet seat now? And so many myths were born as that epidemic spread throughout the world. And then it quietly went away from a news standpoint, but you're right. It is as treatable and manageable as type 2 diabetes. I mean, some people have even said, some people, if it's not prevalent at all, the virus is actually non-existent in their system because of these drugs. It's not even contagious during sex. And
it's incredible.
It is. And I love that we're taking a moment to appreciate this, because at one point, all you read about in the news was HIV AIDS, so much fear, so much stigma. But because we have never made a big deal about how it has almost been obliterated, those myths still prevail.
I mean, it reminds me of, growing up, I always kind of heard this idea of like, one day we'll have a cure for cancer. The truth is, like, there will never be one day where there's a front page news story that says we have a cure for cancer. The reality is, so many different specific types of cancer just have lower and lower and lower rates because we found ways to decrease them, to solve them, to work to, make them less prevalent. And those are good news stories worth celebrating, but like, it's never going to be like, oh, we found the miracle cure for cancer. It's always going to be this like small step of progress to the point where it doesn't feel like a huge thing. The exception might be COVID, but even then, I think it might be, I think it is going to be this slow march towards getting rid of this thing. And one day there will be a story that says, there have been 0 cases reported for 90 days, which is what happened with Ebola just a month or 2 ago in the
I saw
Congo,
you guys
I believe.
put that out there. Yeah.
But like, besides those things, it is always going to be that slow march of progress. And so that's why it's important, I think, that we're all, getting involved, because we all actually can have just a small part to play in that greater story. And we probably won't ever get the credit for, being the one to cure cancer. But if we all, are doing our small part for COVID or Ebola or whatever it is, like those solutions come, they always come.
So I have to ask, and you're just going to have to tell me the full story, because you started the good newspaper before COVID, long before COVID, and during a time when newspaper, magazine, print, we could even say is dead. I mean, I saw Oprah magazine recently announced they are not going to be in print by the end of this year. But you up and started a real life, old school newspaper business. And so I want to hear what made you want to do that. And then are you rethinking that? How have you pivoted during this COVID time?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I will say, like, it's the dumbest thing I've ever done, and it's the best thing I've ever done. I don't think anybody should follow in our footsteps. But for me, from the beginning, it really was about this idea of, okay, well, our brains have this internal negativity bias. So you've got to trick people. And like, what's the best way to trick people in a way that's ethical? It's to lean into things that are unique, that like surprise and delight, that are remarkable, as Seth Godin would say. And so like the most financially effective way I could think to do that was, what if we created a print newspaper? Newspaper itself isn't a super expensive thing. It's recyclable. We can ship it pretty lightweight. What if we do this almost just as a way of like surprising people, especially if we're trying to reach millennials and Gen Z. Like, I've literally never bought a newspaper in my life. I've gotten free newspapers at hotels and stuff. I've read them, but I use the apps. And so I was like, well, if we can surprise people, then maybe they'll stick around a little bit so that they can actually absorb this good news. And maybe when they're flipping through the pages slowly, it allows your brain to slow down enough that, the neuroscience shows you're going to absorb it on a deeper level than if you can just tab over to the next tab. And so that's where it started. And the beautiful thing is, I think that we also found that it becomes the good newspaper becomes a physical manifestation of something that we believe in. And, we don't expect with the good newspaper or good to reach everybody in the world. I think there's a core group of people, and I think a lot of your community is this person that just believes that change is possible, that hope is real, that we have the ability and the almost like requirement to make a difference in the world, and that when we see problems, like, we can be a part of the solution. And I love that the good newspaper has become this representation of that for a group of people, for nurses and teachers and people who work at nonprofits and people who support nonprofits. We've got posters on the inside of every issue. They put them on their walls. The front page of the newspaper is designed to be so beautiful that you want to leave it out on your coffee table so that, when people come over, like, you have a natural inclination to talk about good news. Like, all of these things, like, are kind of secondary benefits. And so, it's interesting too, like, you ask about, like, are we rethinking things? I think, of course, like, I don't expect that the good newspaper will be around forever. I think, it's outrageous and expensive, and it's not expensive to buy. It's just expensive to make for us. But it's like, it's wild that we make it. But in, like, for the foreseeable future, like, we definitely want to keep on making it, because it does do the trick. Like, it truly does slow you down enough to feel a sense of hope. And when you pass it along to somebody else, you physically get to give hope to somebody else. And it's that daily reminder when it's in your house that like, good is possible, and we have the obligation to be a part of it. And so it's interesting too, in the time of COVID, when COVID first kind of became a thing on the scene in the US, and people started, holing up in their house and self-quarantining, we knew that mental health was going to be a really important thing. We knew that at Good, we don't have the ability to, work on the front lines in hospitals or to create PPE, or do any of the other things that can change the game for people. But we did know that we had the ability to help people feel a little bit more hopeful during a challenging time. And so I guess here's the other thing. We also were like, well, here's like if a recession comes, which, the media was saying a recession is probably going to come, the first thing to go is going to be a non-essential print newspaper filled with good news. Like, we are going to go out of business. And so what I basically brought it up with the team and I said, I think we should make the good newspaper free. We should at least send everybody who wants one a free copy of the newspaper, because I think we have the ability to help people. And we've got extra newspapers in inventory. I think we can do it, because if we're going to go out of business in 2 months anyway, let's burn out bright. Let's burn out living out our mission. And so we set up a way for basically people to sign up for the good newspaper, but get their first month free, no strings attached. We would pay for printing the paper. We would pay for shipping the paper. We'd put it out in the mail and give it as a gift. We put this out online, and truly, I had done the math. I was like, okay, we can give away 1,000 of these newspapers or something like that before our bank account is just empty, and then we'll close up shop. And we do this, and I'm expecting, and we're posting. We're saying, please, if you don't have the financial means, unsubscribe after you get this. Do not feel obligated to stay around. We truly want to give this as a gift. And we get to the end of that first month, we give away, 1,000 newspapers. I'm like, cool, let's check the bank account. 85% of everybody who signed up had stayed subscribed. And to date, 85% of people who had signed up had stayed subscribed. And so this thing that we thought was our kind of farewell party, or our little goodbye, it turned out to be the thing that has kept us alive, as basically all of our advertisements have dropped out because brands are spending less money on advertising. Not that we had that much advertising anyway. All these other financial things started falling away, speaking gigs, things like that. But this core group of people who care about good news, who believe in the power of doing good, especially during difficult times, just by getting the good newspaper, they've allowed us to continue doing this through the whole pandemic. And I can't believe that, we've created, almost a dozen newspapers this year and have gotten to reach tens of thousands of people with this print medium. So all that to say, it's the dumbest thing we've ever done, and we're so glad we did it.
You bring up a good point, though. Having a physical artifact that reminds you of good is really important. It's interesting we're having this conversation today because my friend Amy Wolf, she is from Oregon. She's the founder of Don't Give Up Signs. And she asked me to write her foreword to her book that's coming out, I guess, in a few months. I was reading the paper manuscript yesterday, and it's called Signs of Hope. And her entire movement started because she heard about suicide rates in her hometown, which is just an hour outside. I mean, it's very near Portland in Oregon. And she wanted to do something, and this idea came to her to just print signs. And with very simple messages, they're black signs, and they say on them, don't give up, you matter. Simple, that's it. And when she first told me about it a few years ago, she was super on fire about it. And I thought, that's cool. I think that's awesome. And this was a very side gig for her. She doesn't charge for any of these. She just charges for the cost of these signs. But when I read her manuscript this week, there is story after story after story of people whose lives honestly were changed. They pivoted. There was a man, the way her business ended up going viral about a year ago is because a man was planning on taking his life that day, and he drove past one of her signs in a town that she didn't even live in, and it gave him that sign of hope. Don't give up. And he began changing his route to work every day just to drive by this sign. And eventually he knocked on this door of the guy who lived there and just said, I need you to know. And I mean, and there's story after story of this. So there is something powerful about having these posts, these signs that are physical signs that remind us to hold on to the good, to hold on for hope. Do you know Amy? Have you seen any of those signs being from
Yeah, well,
Oregon?
so it's so funny that like you bring her up because Amy was like the last person I met before I went into quarantine. Like there
No
was like a
way.
speaking gig the month before in Portland. We both spoke. I met her and I was like, I love you. We have to do a story about you. And I think we've snuck 2 stories about her into the newspaper since, just because it's so incredible. We love what she's doing. And yeah, a bunch of my neighbors have the signs actually. So I see them when I take my dog on walks. Yeah, I'm so excited for her book. That's amazing.
Yes, I'm excited too. And I'm excited for your newspaper. And I do think that, yeah, as in some ways, a newspaper is disruptive because it is out of vogue, quote unquote. But at the same time, it's so beautifully printed. And it does we need these reminders, like these signs. I mean, I make jewelry. Oh, I don't make jewelry. I, partner with artisans who create this beautiful jewelry. And one of the things that I think is so powerful about it is that it is this physical artifact. So when I am wearing a piece that is handmade by another human being who I know needs hope, and I know that this job is providing her with hope, and it gives me courage, as I'm stroking a necklace right now, because
It's incredible. Yeah.
yeah. So it is important to have these physical reminders. Tell me, you're in Oregon, as you mentioned, in Portland, and whew, I mean, it is. I am seeing the pictures from my friends. I've been on the phone with. I was just in Oregon a couple months ago. I love Oregon. I was supposed to fly out in just a few days to Bend. I know. And we were celebrating one of my girlfriends who just, she was diagnosed with cancer and had the surgery, and surgery's over. So we were going on this celebratory little trip. Just had to reroute it to Asheville, going to Asheville. If you have any Asheville
Wonderful.
tips, I've never been. But it is, I spoke with a couple of my Oregon friends this week, and it's hard. It's really hard when you look out and you see smoke. It's almost this physical reminder of just what's happening in the world right now, feeling like, everyone is on fire, and now your part of the country is on fire. Can you share a little bit of good news coming out from your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many small pieces of good news, which is just communities showing up for each other. I've got friends who they have converted their homes or their offices or their churches into places for people to drop off supplies. So Portland, for the most part, like there's probably going to be no flames that hit Portland itself. So a lot of people from Eastern Oregon, Southern Oregon, they're fleeing to Portland and either holding up in Airbnbs or hotels or our convention center. But for the most part, people left without a lot of time, without a lot of their necessary things. Maybe they brought a pair of pants and a few extra pairs of underwear. Probably didn't bring soap, things like that. And so we've seen so many people on the ground who are collecting items so that people can just have a little bit of a sense of normalcy while they're wondering, is my home still going to be alive? So there's a million stories of people doing that. There's people who from around the world are mailing filters and box fans over to Oregon. Basically every store is sold out, but basically by having an air filter and a box fan, you can create your own makeshift way of filtering the smoke out of your house, which is incredible. And so people are literally just like going to FedEx and shipping these to addresses in Oregon and helping them get to the right places. And then lastly, kind of on a heroic note, there's this beautiful, inspiring story that there's this community in middle of nowhere, Oregon, that is really, really remote. And, in the middle of the night, the fires are raging and basically the fires have blocked off the only real exit from this community. and you've got firefighters who somehow make it out to this community and lead the way for this caravan of cars of I think more than 200 people who fled this community using like Forest Service roads. And it's like this beautiful thing that I'm sure they're going to make a movie about one day. There's also stories of helicopter crews rescuing people. And then there's also the organizations that, like Oregon is actually outside of Portland is a super rural state. So a lot of people have animals, and there's an organization called VimaNet that is connecting people with basically emergency support for their animals, to either, care for them if they, had like smoke inhalation, if they're, if they've got livestock or horses, but also, people who can't flee with their horse. And so somebody else is coming in with a horse trailer and helping take that horse away to keep it alive. And, there's so many amazing people working together. Oh, lastly, fire crews from Mexico and Canada flying to the US to help put out fires along the whole West Coast, volunteering their time and their energy in the midst of, a pandemic, in the midst of so many other things going on in their personal lives, fire season in their own countries, stepping up to help us during our time of need, which is, I don't know, it's heartbreaking and beautiful.
There are so many reflections I walked away with from this conversation, and I want you to sit with it and reflect on your own. But I'm going to leave you with this because Branden quoted Bernice King, "Being truthful about the state of our nation and world does not equal losing hope. Hope sees truth and still believes better. That which dismisses or does not seek truth, but grins, saying it will be okay, is naivete, not hope." My desire for you is that you've walked away from the Difficult Dialogue series with tools, new perspectives, and most of all, with hope. Thank you so much for tuning in. To keep up with Branden and his good news, follow him at www.brandenharvey.com, and for sure go follow Good Co on Instagram for some good news. Subscribe to his newsletter. I promise it will give you an exhale when you receive it. Before we go, don't forget to review and rate the podcast, because that way more people find the show. It's a great thing to do while I'm not going to be dropping in your earbuds over the next couple of weeks as we prep for our next mental health series. Our wonderful music for today's show is by my good friend Ellie Holcomb. Going Scared is produced by Eddie Kolfoltz, and I'm Jessica Honegger. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.